Okay, I believe we're live. Hello, everybody. Contrarian Dude here, and I have on the line Eli. And I'll set this up a little bit, and then I'll get Eli to introduce himself, actually. So I'm a libertarian. This is generally a libertarian channel. We like to talk about libertarian issues here. And pardon me, I'm getting... My apologies for that. I was hearing myself in my own ear, and now that's fixed. Okay. Let me double check, make sure that's all completely gone. That's gone, that's gone, that's gone. And nope, I'm over there on Chrome as well. Okay, my bad, people. I am back without my own echo, 10 seconds in delay. Sorry for that, guys. So yeah, I'm Contrarian Dude, Max, right? Feel free to call me Max or whatever. This is a libertarian channel, and I really wanted to get out of the libertarian bubble and start reaching out to people who have different ideas than mine, and I really wanted to start getting lots of different perspectives. This isn't about attacking anybody, but I do have my beliefs, and so I want to invite people in who have different beliefs, and we're going to go head to head and sort of have a bit of a chat about that as respectfully and intellectually as we can. So that's the purpose of this. We're doing this one today. I also have another person from the Feel the Burn, a volunteer for the Feel the Burn organization tomorrow at 12:30 p.m. Pacific time, if you want to tune in for that as well. But with that, let's go ahead and get started and introduce Eli. How are you, Eli?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you so much for sharing, giving up your time to be here. I really appreciate it. We had a little bit of a pre-chat, and there was one topic that we did want to focus on, which was, we want to talk about free education. We thought, just for the heck of it, let's just choose a topic and sort of really kind of zero in on that. And I know that's one of Bernie Sanders' platforms, debt-free free education. But before we do get to that, there's a question I'm going to ask all my guests. I'd love to ask you as well, if you don't mind. That question is, like, how did you, so what political leanings do you have, and how did you arrive at them?
Sure. So I grew up in a left-leaning independent household. My parents are both refugees from Russia, from the Soviet Union. So I kind of know what socialism is, I guess, from everything that they have told me. They had to sit on welfare, I guess. I don't want to say sit because they were active. They had welfare, food stamps, everything that they needed, and now they're both doctors. So that's kind of where I come from. My background is a place where my parents came to America with nothing as refugees and kind of struck it out in the world. And they did have to take government assistance, and they did have to get grants from college. And now they, paid more than their fair share back in taxes. So that's kind of where I've arrived at my sort of political ideology. I'm definitely way more left than my parents are. I wouldn't consider myself a socialist, but I'm definitely on social issues much more left than my parents are, and on economic issues probably a little more left than they are.
Okay, when you say on social issues, can you define that? Because socialism to me is an economic philosophy. Sure. So what do you mean by that?
Well, by social issues, I mean, it's more not economically related. It's very libertarian views. Like, I think, drugs should be decriminalized. I believe that prostitution should be legal. I believe, gay marriage should of course be a thing. And in fact, after the gay marriage ruling, someone came out and said, well, why shouldn't polygamy be legal? And I said, well, honestly, I don't care. I would be okay with polygamy being legal too. So I'm very libertarian in terms of the social issues. I'm very much do what you want sort of dude.
Okay, cool. So we generally agree on pretty much all the social issues then. It's just the economic issues that we kind of differentiate. Yeah. Perhaps we could start with, do you have some kind of like definitions for, I know Bernie Sanders always tries to make a distinction between a democratic socialist and a normal socialist. And do you want to go through some definitions and what they mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think that the distinction is, there's a clear distinction, but I don't think it's what Bernie makes of it. If I'm going to be honest, the way I define socialism and the way that Merriam-Webster defines socialism is a government or a type of system where the main factors of production are owned by the government, which is not something that I support, and that's not something that Bernie supports. If you look at his platform, he doesn't really advocate for government ownership of the means of production of businesses or anything like that. There are a few specific things where he thinks where the government can improve upon them, but he's not saying that your local mom and pop shop or your gas station should be owned by the government. Those are not part of his policies, which is why I personally do not believe that he is a socialist. Now, if you look from a definition standpoint, the difference between a democratic socialist and a socialist is that the socialist is more about a revolutionary, like actually physically going to get a revolution and become the society, whereas a democratic socialist is getting there through democratic means, to where you would elect socialists into government office and you would go and get sort of socialist change done through a democratic process, and it would never be totalitarian. So that's the main sort of difference by definition.
Okay, so, and by the way, I agree with those definitions there in terms of the only difference that I see between totalitarian socialism and democratic socialism is the mechanism by which you arrive there and how you vote for people and whatever else. It's just mechanical and structural, but the goals are the same.
The goals are the same by a definition standpoint. Not that I'm saying that Bernie is advocating for the same goals as a Soviet socialist would.
Okay, understood. I'm cool and can agree with all of those definitions. Happy with that. Let me think. So, okay, so do we want to get into the free education stuff? That was a topic that you wanted to talk about. So let's go there. And as we get into it, I'll just volunteer something for myself. I've noticed that the philosophical and moral arguments around the proper role of government, what should government be doing, generally it doesn't translate, doesn't cross, and doesn't motivate people to change. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be speaking about a strictly utilitarian concept, just working out what's actually going to be better for people, all moral considerations aside. And so I just wanted to let you know that that's kind of the position I'm going to be taking. And yeah, if you want to kick off the discussion, then please.
Sure. I mean, I guess I should start by introducing what Bernie has proposed, since that's kind of what we're advocating for. And so he's proposing free college at public universities, funded through there's a string of taxes on Wall Street, but they're small. For example, 0.5% tax on stock transactions. That is the biggest tax. After that, it's like a 0.005% tax on derivatives. You'll have to forgive me for not remembering the exact numbers, but it's not necessarily going to be attacking at most of the middle class. It's more the Wall Street, and hopefully try to make the markets less volatile, because people will be maybe thinking a little more before they're making these trades if they're going to be taxed 0.5%. Now this accounts for 2/3 of the funding. The last third comes from the states, and so this is kind of where libertarians might come in and say, well, there's no incentive for college to get cheaper because it's risen so much dramatically in the last 40 years, which it has. But one of the facets of his plan is states going in and actually auditing and looking at the administration charges of what's going on at these colleges to see where they can trim and make college cheaper, because the states are responsible for the last third. Okay.
So I guess there's two kind of things. He's saying he's going to fund it through some tax on Wall Street and whatever else. That's a whole animal that we can go and discuss if we want to get to later. But then I don't really care where money comes from. The point is that we agree that it's a redistribution of wealth, I think. We're taking money from some people, giving it to others. Let's forget for the moment that we're taking money from some people and whether or not that's good or virtuous or even productive, and whether that's going to help or hurt the economy for doing that. Let's focus on, so the government has a kitty, it has some money. What they're arguing is that they're going to spend this money on education, and that's going to be some significant value, and presumably in that context that it's going to be better spent there than anywhere else, and it's worth taking the money from these other group of people. So why don't you share a little bit about why you think governments should pay for education and should be free for people to have it?
So honestly, so you talked about how you don't want morals to be as part of this discussion. And for me, I would look at it differently, because I do think that ethically speaking, if someone has the capability of going to college, there shouldn't be a barrier in terms of cost from preventing them to go to college. Now, that isn't me saying that everyone should go to college, because I don't believe that, and I don't think anyone really believes that every single person should go to college. There are definitely technical schools, and Bernie's plan would, make public technical schools free as well. It's not like it's just college. But from a moral standpoint, I believe that people shouldn't be leaving college with boatloads of debt, and I believe that cost should not be a barrier. If you're smart enough and you have the merit to go to college, cost should not be a barrier for you to go to college. And I mean, the other thing is when people say and this really ticks me off, is when people say we can't do it. And it's like, yes, we can, because so many other countries have done it. It's just a matter of whether we want to or not.
Right. Okay, so let's take this tack. Let's pretend you're a benevolent dictator. You don't have to convince anyone of anything. There's no like playing it safe or whatever. How much education would you provide by the state?
So I think that the mandatory K through 12 system is what should stay in place. However, I mean, if I were in charge, this is not what Bernie's necessarily advocating, but if I were in charge, I would not make everyone go through K through 12. I think at around 9th, 10th grade, we can see whether people should be on a college readiness track or on a track to technical school, because at that point you can really see whether people are prepared for that. I definitely and not in line with maybe a lot of other liberals, or Bernie is not necessarily proposed anything specific towards high school education, but I mean, I would go back. It's not just from college, but go back and make sure people are on the track. I don't think that we should be spending $10,000 a year for a kid who's never going to go to college in a college preparatory system. That doesn't make sense. But well, once again, if you have the capability to go to college and you have the test scores for it and you have the grades for it, then I believe that it is the government's responsibility to provide the funding for them, because these people are likely to go off and get jobs and pay taxes, and it'll funnel back into the system at one point or the other.
Yeah, so you're saying it's a wise investment. Invest in these people's education and they will be able to pay it back plus interest, effectively.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, they will. That's the argument I'm making. And not just that, and even if they don't, from a standpoint of monetary wise, and this is, where economics really looks at everything as just from a money base, and it really doesn't consider, for example, the cultural implications. I personally believe that, spending money on an artist to make a mural in a city, for example, might be a right thing to do. It doesn't make anyone any money. But I would advocate for something like that, because I believe that there's a cultural element too that can't be quantified by money.
Okay, I mean, I agree. There's value in art and all forms of art, comedians and singing and songwriting and murals. I agree that there's value in those things. My question is, how are you establishing? How would you know if you went down the wrong path and provided too much education? Like, for example, why don't you say everyone gets college education, or everyone can stay in college until they're 80 years old? Like, at some point between no education and all that education, you realize there's a sweet spot. What are the metrics you're going to look at to identify that?
I mean, there are some set norms, and the 4-year college track is kind of what we have right now, and it may not be the perfect track, but it's kind of what we got, and it's a system we have in place. Whether we have free college or not, that's the system that exists. So we kind of do have to conform to that system. And sure, you could argue that an engineer taking a history of Greeks class in college is not useful to him, and I guess we'd call that a deadweight loss. But in the end, I'd say the net benefit of providing the overall college experience is going to be beneficial. And we can't really account. We don't know what's going to be useful in people's lives. So, I mean, the general indicator is 4 years of college will prepare you for what you need to be prepared for. So, I mean, that's what I would say.
I guess that's my point. I mean, we're talking about a government. If government provides all the funding for education, then government gets to set the rules for what education is. So the fact that there's this 4-year norm right now, to me, is largely irrelevant. And that's what to me is so confusing. It's like, at some point, someone blew the whistle and said, okay, no longer should government provide all the education until year 12. They should also provide all the education until bachelor's. They've added 4 years. Why? Where do the metrics come from? How do you know it's a good investment?
I mean, the platform is that a K through 12 graduating with a high school diploma right now is pretty much useless. You don't have any skills. Like, you got into the workforce, unless you're working at McDonald's or something, you have no skills. And I mean, and that's a problem. That's a huge problem in terms of a technical standpoint. Like, when you graduate from college, from high school, you're not ready to be a plumber either, or a carpenter or anything like that. You're just not ready for a job, in my opinion. And of course, that means that we have to revamp the high school system. Don't get me wrong, but we do have this college readiness track. We're preparing people to go to college. And really, they're not going to be able to work a job without going to college. And under its current system, it's just not working. And so I think that we need to provide this next step for them to actually be productive members of society.
So here's my challenge. I've asked the same question a few times. I'll try and ask it in a really pointed way, and maybe give you my perspective first to give you maybe give you more rails to run on. What I see happening is someone will propose some government program. A libertarian will look at that and say, you know what, that's probably not going to work because X, Y, and Z. It doesn't work, and then the people who proposed for it don't come back and say. Generally, what they say is, well, no, we just didn't do enough. What we need to do is more of it.
Yeah.
And so I think this is exactly what's happening here, right? I mean, libertarians was back in the day, without government spending one penny on any kind of, 200 years ago, 150 years ago, when technology was whatever it was back then, literacy rates in the country, in the United States, over 99%. Now, I agree with your problem. The kids are leaving high school with absolutely no skills. And by the government's own reports, 20% of high school graduates do not have literacy and numeracy skills at a level that they can earn minimum wage.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean,
simply, it would be mad for an employer to pay the person minimum wage because their skills are so low they can't possibly add that much value into the business.
And I mean, once.
Well, hang on, let me finish. So we agree the system is broken. There's no question about that. Our schooling system is letting our children down. Libertarian philosophy, libertarian economics predicted that this would happen as soon as when you took the education system from the free market, where literacy rates were incredibly high. Anybody could get education, even for free back then. Anybody, it was available to anybody. Government took control of it, and now it's delivering disastrous results, as we predicted. And now that same thought process that says the government should provide it wants to double down and says, now let's inflict another 4 years of government on our poor children. And I'm like saying, can you give me a metric that'll say, at the end of it, you'll be able to say, you know what, we were wrong, we need to undo it.
Well, that's why I'm saying, well, I call myself a progressive because I believe that it's not an approach where we say, well, we screwed up, we're done with it. And we should just not have done anything in the first place. I look at it and say, yes, we should be constantly improving the systems we have. And I don't mean just spend more money on it, because that's not necessarily going to fix it. I mean, we need to completely change the systems. Unfortunately, with our government system we have right now, fast change and reactiveness isn't really the reality, which sucks. But that doesn't mean it's the way it shouldn't be. And so when it comes to schooling, we look at this plan, and I mean, the libertarian view would be no public schools, which I don't believe would be. I mean, of course, you'd have classes again, like much larger than they are now. And right now, it's pretty bad how much richer the rich are than the poor. And you're going to have a whole class of people that can afford to go to school, and a whole class of people that can. And learning is much more than just about literacy. It's not just about learning how to read or reading at a 6th grade level or writing at a 6th grade level, which I think is the metrics they use right now. It's more about, being able to go and do a job we live in a society where we need engineers, and we need mathematicians of some sort, and we need physicists, and we need people doing all these sort of things. We're not living 150 years ago where you can get away without all those different types of professions, and you had a working class that didn't need skills. So when you look at college and what it provides for people is sort of narrowing in on what they're going to do when they're older. And sure, I'm not saying the government should go paying for someone to get 8 different majors. That's not something I agree with or Bernie agrees with. But we live in a society where someone without these, centered in skills, they're not going to get anywhere. And we're going to be in a society where, well, you're going to end up just being whatever your parent is, because they're going to teach you those skills to be whatever they are, which I don't think is the right way to go about things.
Okay, so I don't know what to do here. I'm going to ask the question again. It's like the 4th time I've asked.
Okay, I guess I'm misunderstanding the question.
Okay. How will you know? You said, I agree with you. But the free market used to provide these things very, very well. And now, because government's taken over so much of education, the free market's delivering it. Sorry, the socialized system is delivering those things very, very poorly. The quality of labor, I would argue, is very, very low. And as a result, poor people are suffering. And this is my big problem with this. My big problem with all of this socialized education is that poor people are suffering miserably because the government is so involved. Now, what I'm asking for you, again, is are you even open to entertaining the idea that you could be wrong? And if you were wrong, how would you know? Or are you in a position where you can keep keep advocating this no matter how bad it gets, and it'll never be wrong. Like, have you given yourself this like thing that's like, well, when I see this, I'll know we went down the wrong path and we should go back and try something that used to work really, really well. How will you know?
So let me get this straight. Your question is, how will we know when someone has enough education?
No.
Repeat it, because you've got a lot of.
Okay.
So when will I say that?
You seem to assume, it seems to be like an assumption of fact in your argument that the government, the only way to provide education, including to the poor people, is through government. Yes. And you're locked into this solution.
All right.
Now, what I'm arguing, and what libertarians would argue, is that there are alternative solutions, and in fact, history teaches us they used to work very, very well. Now, we gave kindergarten through year 12 to government because your argument won the day. It convinced enough people that government needed to provide primary school education, elementary school education, middle school, high school, and we gave it to them. And the results have been really, really, really bad. And we both agree on that. My question is, how will you know that you should go back to government getting out of it? What set of events would need to take place for you to say, I was wrong? Government shouldn't be involved in education.
I don't think that'll ever happen, to be honest. I don't think I'm ever going to say the government shouldn't be involved in education. And honestly, the whole argument. So here's a question for you. Do you believe that the government always makes things worse? Or are there some things where they make it better?
Yeah, there's definitely some things, but they're few and far between.
Okay. So I'm of the fact that we need this, or of a stance where someone needs to be regulating things. And I'm not saying that everything needs to be equal, and I'm not a socialist, as I said before, because I don't think the government should own the means of production. However, in terms of regulation, I believe that there needs to be more done. And the way you look at this is if we're looking at, for example, the tragedy of the commons, which I'm sure a lot of your viewers are familiar with. But pretty much, if you, like, simple example, you have like a lake. A lake has 100 fish and you got 50 people living around it. If each person fishes one fish and they can eat, the fish can reproduce, you have enough fish for everyone. That's the way it would work with the government, regulating everyone. If you don't, then you have a capitalist system or a libertarian system where everyone's out fishing because they know that if they don't, someone else will. So my stance is built upon this fact that the government will improve things and can improve things. Now, not everything is going to be great. Not everything is going to be as efficient as it would be in every industry if there was, libertarian system. But I am of the mind that we do need to progressively, at every step, evaluate and improve upon them with the government. And I think that it's very arguable whether the government's, whether more government or less government is effective or not, because you seem to think that the public school system is a failure. And I would disagree, because we look around the world and we look at places that don't necessarily have a public school system. We look at African nations, the heart of the either totalitarian or completely non-existent governments where the literacy rates are complete crap. And then you look at the Soviet Union or most of the Europe where the literacy rates are 99%, even higher than the US's. So to say that it's not effective or doesn't work is kind of a fallacy, because it does work, and we have evidence of that.
So I can see how it can work. I can see how it cannot work. I'm not suggesting that it's a guarantee. A socialized system is guaranteed to not work, especially in the short term. But my challenge is this. You haven't given yourself, contained in your argument is a presupposition that you're correct. Like, let's say we're business partners, right? And I say, hey, Eli, we've got a budget of 50 grand. I'm going to spend 10 grand a month on this thing that I reckon is going to be awesome. It's just going to blow our business up. We're going to be able to expand, employ more people, make more profits. It's going to be awesome. And I convince you, and it sounds like a really good idea. And we start investing this $10,000 a month, $10,000 a month, $10,000. And it's just not producing results, not producing results, not producing results. At some point, I would be negligent as a business owner and your partner if I said, this isn't working. We need to come up with something different. And contained in your arguments so far that I've heard today, there's no possibility that you will ever make that decision. No matter how bad the evidence gets, you'll never, ever make the decision.
But that's under the assumption that I think that it's bad, and I don't. So, if I see...
But here's my question. What events would need to take place in order for you to believe that it's bad?
I guess the literacy rate starts falling dramatically. And this is, by the way, without, if the government continued to try to improve, and this was continuing to happen with literacy rates continuing to fall, then yes, I would think that the government was screwing something up. But two things. Number one, the literacy rates have been high and have gone up, and number two, we're not constantly improving, which is an issue in itself. We're not going back and reevaluating what went wrong. We're not fixing the problems that exist. So I guess I don't know if I answered your question once again, because I don't see a problem, and I tell you that I see a problem once it stops working. And under the current circumstances, I don't think that public education isn't working.
So I think you contradicted yourself in the same sentence. You said that we're not going back and reevaluating. We're not doing that, and that's why the educational results that we're getting are so poor. And then you said it's not broken.
I said it could get better if we went back and reevaluated, but I think it's good where it is now, even though it could get better. And I never want to settle for what we have now. I think it could get better. I think that if the government completely stopped doing public education, I think that the literacy in our country would substantially drop. And I mean, unfortunately, we don't have an empirical data of some country suddenly stopping providing the public education to its children. We don't really have evidence of what's going to happen. But to say it's not going to work is, it has worked, and it works all around the world.
So I mean, you asked me this question earlier. Let me ask the question back. You asked me, do I think everything the government touches turns to dust? I said, no, there's some things that are good, but it's few and far between. Same question to you. Do you think does the government ever do anything that is wrong? The outcome is terrible?
Oh, absolutely. But once again, it's one of those things that as a progressive, we can say, yeah, we screwed up and we're going to go back and fix it. And we can't we're not going to be complacent. We're going to go back and fix what went wrong. Now, that's the problem I see between modern day conservatives. And I mean, libertarians are it's interesting because you guys are right. I mean, I wouldn't say in the middle. I think that fiscally you're very aligned with, I wouldn't even say you're aligned with Republicans because they end up spending so much on everything in terms of military spending, and it just doesn't align with Democrats. It's very weird for libertarians because there's not a party that suits you. But I think the key difference between current conservatives and current progressives is that progressives want to see problems and want to fix them, whereas conservatives don't, and they just want to keep things as they are. And maybe even, and for example, they won't be against public schools, but they'll want to take away funding from public schools. And I really don't see how that's a way to solve the problems in our public schools today.
Okay. So I'm not a Republican or conservative, what you call it. I don't think your characterization of them is fair, but I'm not going to, doesn't matter. I'll get a conservative on here to discuss their views another time. I'm really struggling with this conversation because you set it up in such a way that no matter what happens, no matter how bad your results are for what it is that you're advocating, that just keep trying is the answer. Keep doing more.
Exactly. And I mean,
but what if you're going down, like if you're in I don't know, you're in Mexico City and you want to get to LA, and you start heading south, and you notice on the street signs that you're getting further and further away to LA because
so then the progressive
how do you go into to turn around?
Well, that's what the progressive would do. They're like, well, here's a problem, let's fix it, and we're going to turn around. I mean,
what if turning it around meant getting the government out of it and letting the free market take over?
Well, but that's not what it means, because in
every situation, without exception, that's what it means.
No, because you're characterizing it differently than I am. I mean, and of course you have your own worldview, and I have my own worldview, and you're looking at it, and you seem to think that the government has never made things better, or has in very few amount of situations. The way I've looked at it is, the government has gone in and they have screwed things up before, and they have gone and they've fixed things and made things better, and it's not a perfectly oiled machine, and it is not necessarily the most efficient way in a lot of industries. And that's once again why I think that capitalism works in a lot of industries, but in some, and specifically the ones that have ethical concerns such as healthcare, the government does need to come in. And if it may not work immediately. And I mean, for example, Obamacare, it didn't work in the way that Obama wanted it to work specifically, but there were improvements. We got 20 million more people with insurance. So then I would say, all right, here's the problem. People are laying off workers or making them work 28 hours a week instead of 40, so they don't have to provide them health care. How can we look at this and how can we fix this problem? Instead of just pulling out completely, I would target this problem and then try to fix this one. I mean, I think that's where we diverge here, and I don't think we're, you know, you're not going to convince me, I'm not going to convince you. I mean, we're just having a discussion here. But to me, it's the government's role to make people's lives better, and you don't agree with that. But I believe that government does make things better if they go back and they're constantly improving on the problems that exist in our society.
But I can use the same argument about the free market. You know, maybe not the first entrepreneur who tries to solve the problem, he goes out of business because his idea sucked. But more entrepreneurs come through, we try new business models, and eventually we find a new business model that works really, really well. I can make the same argument both ways. So,
exactly.
It's not like,
however,
it's not like socialist or progressive have a monopoly on the reiterative process and constantly improving.
Yeah,
so it can't be your argument that...
Sure, and that's why I'm not saying that the government should go and grab your local game store or whatever it is. I'm not saying that the government should go take over the private industry. There are a few specific things in areas. I mean, if you're looking at the pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical industry, for example, like, yeah, they're going to innovate, good for them. But the fact that they're charging tens of thousands of dollars for a drug that costs dollars to produce, you know, you call that, well, that's powering innovation. But I would say they're making so much profit to where, you know, we got to think about lives versus profit here. And it's a hard thing to do, and not everyone can do it. And I think at one point, for me, the libertarian standpoint is it's not my responsibility to take care of other people, and that's okay. That's your belief. But for me, I believe it is responsibility to take care of those that are just shit out of luck, that, you know, that can't afford their healthcare costs, that the pharmaceutical companies are stealing. So we're not going to say stealing, charging them so much for their life-saving medication. And that's just where we have a difference of opinion.
Yeah, again, I mean, you've brought in a whole other topic now, which is pharmaceutical care, and I got several videos on my channel about this. It's actually government that what it does is it protects big businesses and allows them to charge ridiculous prices. And again, poor people, because people said, hey, government, you know, get the FDA involved, make sure that we don't have bad drugs, keep us safe. Well, that organization now protects big pharmaceutical companies from competition, and they're able to charge ridiculous prices. And once again, the exact same thing. The libertarian said, if you get governments involved, it sounds good. It sounds like people really need to be helped. You know, sometimes there's bad drugs go on and bad drugs kill people, and evil corporations, they sell bad drugs and make profits. It sounded like a really good argument. The consequence is that, as exactly as predicted, what happens is that power center, this FDA, is taken over and controlled by pharmaceutical companies. And those pharmaceutical companies now use the government as a weapon against the poor, against anybody trying to compete with them, and people get gouged for high prices. It's exactly as we predicted. And still, there's never a point that you're going to say, you know what, you were right, exactly what you said was predicted, this is the wrong avenue to pursue. I'm not saying let's stop reiterating, I'm not saying let's stop improving, but we're heading down a path that where every time you try and improve, things get worse. Because let's go back to the on topic, which is the education system. There is not a single politician, there is not a single president, there's not a single congressman who's ever got voted in who said, I am going to make education worse. That has never happened anywhere, in any country at all. Now, in this country, for decades and decades and decades, the quality of education has been going down. And I'm like, okay, so there's this iterative process that's been going on for decades with more and more government involvement, more and more government funding for it, yields worse and worse results. At what point do you admit that you're wrong?
Okay, once again, what measure are you using in terms of saying government education is getting worse? Because people are reading better, and people are...
That's not true at all. That's not true at all. People are reading much worse. Literacy rates are way down. Numeracy rates are way down. And the proof of I would say the ultimate proof in the pudding is that people leftists think that like minimum wage has got something to do with standard of living. It hasn't. When you come out of school, you have a set of skills, all right? Now, one option is you can just money. I mean, that's what, just going, hey, can I do a service for you? I'm really good at this. Do you need someone to do your books? Do you need someone to mow your lawn? Do you need someone to, and you can just go and create a job, right? If your skills are that good and someone's life, someone's going to give you enough money to live if you contribute that much value. But the challenge is that, and their skill is so low that they can't add value to other people's lives. And that's why people aren't able to make ends meet. It's, you can change the laws all you like, but if the person doesn't have the skill set to add value, if you raise the minimum wage, all that means is if you value per hour, then no one can hire you. Because
you're breaking up on me. Could you repeat that?
So all of those people. But,
sorry, you're breaking up on me a little bit. Could you repeat that last little part?
I said, if you raise the minimum wage to $15 per hour, and surely we agree that there's some coming out of the education system that are just not worth $15 an hour. There's some people there, they can't read, they can't do whatever. Nobody can employ them anymore. Because if I give you $15 an hour, but you only add $2 of value or $3 or $5 value, what that means is that I'm losing $10 per hour. So I just can't do it. You left, and through no fault of your own, you got screwed by the government education system in high school. You left there. You're not worth it to me. I can't give you an instruction booklet for a forklift and say, hey, go learn this and drive the forklift. I can't get you to sign off on the contract that says you're going to follow all the safety rules because you can't read the damn thing. And it's not your fault, poor guy, who got screwed by the government-run education system. But the fact of the matter is you're here now, and I can't employ you because I can't even say, look, I can only afford to give you $5 an hour right now because you're not very valuable. But in time, I will teach you how to do this. I'll teach you how to do that. I'll give you more skills. And in a few years, I will be able to pay you more. I can't even do that to them.
So here's
forever.
So here's ones where we disagree again, because the fact of the matter is that the large corporations are making billions of dollars, and we know this. And the average, the GDP per capita in our country is over $50,000. But the average wage in our country is about $30,000. So there is productivity there. But the people on the bottom are not seeing the productivity in what they made. And you could say that someone is not going to be worth 10 or 15 bucks an hour. And whether we know that's true or not, is or is not, we don't really know, because what you would call a race to the top, people getting more skills and getting paid for it, I would call a race to the bottom in capitalism of people wanting to pay their employees less and less until ultimately people are making very much money. So that's why I believe we need a floor on, on a wage, because, at one point ethics once again has to come into consideration. And there is, like, whether you say it's efficient or not, that's not the issue here. The issue is, can we do it or not? And the answer is yes, we can, because as we've seen across the world with higher minimum wages, it's worked. It's not like, saying things won't work isn't really a response anymore. And because they do. In countries that don't have minimum wages or have significantly lower minimum wages, the quality of life is substantially lower.
Yeah, no, I agree. I can't just magically say minimum wage doesn't work. We have to look at the data, and I think it's completely fair to say that the data is on my side. But all right, we're not going to have a statistics war during this conversation. That's not going to be very productive. So let's not do that. All right, let's change tack a little bit here. First of all, I think I've been leading the conversation a little bit. Do you want to lead for a little while?
I mean, sure. We can talk about. I guess I would talk a little bit about, since this is a libertarian conversation, and I don't know how many of libertarians are, voting and who they vote for. I'm guessing it's usually the Republican candidate, or whether it is the Libertarian candidate itself. I hate the two-party system, but it's a system we live in, and so for me personally, I think a third-party vote is a wasted vote. So I guess maybe an appeal a little bit to why libertarians might like Bernie over, I don't know, some of the Republican candidates. Because for me, I think that there is some libertarian appeal in him, if that's okay.
Do a little piece on that.
All right. So so if you're a libertarian, and if you were, say, forced to vote between a Republican and a Democrat, and Bernie was the candidate on the Democratic side, and I don't know, Donald Trump was the candidate on the Republican side, I think that Bernie would pose a much more, or I guess less devilish stance in terms of the two candidates. And so here's what I would say. I think we agreed on social issues that were pretty similar. I mean, Bernie, we agree in that mass incarceration needs to be ended, the fact that we spend too much money on our prisons, the fact that marijuana needs to be legal. We agree there. So on the social issues, I think we're on a pretty similar page. We pro-choice, all these sorts of things. But moving on from that, if you look at, for example, war, right? Bernie doesn't want to get involved in other conflict. He doesn't want to get involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. That'd be one thing that I would think would be appealing to libertarians. In terms of government surveillance, he voted against the Patriot Act, against the Freedom Act. He is very much against any sort of surveillance. His gun record, I mean, it's not super libertarian, but it's not. When people say people want to take your guns away, I don't really agree with that. Nobody really advocates for that. So it's not like Bernie's saying he wants to take your guns away. He just wants expanded background checks.
Okay, well, I have to kind of, yeah. Sorry, sorry. There's just we can watch a Bernie video and watch his platform.
Sorry, yeah.
So,
I wasn't sure whether that was
really
really
adding anything to the value. No, it's all right. I invited you to do something. You tried something. It's totally fine. No problems at all. So okay. we're gonna have to walk away from the I guess the education stuff, because there's no standard that I can meet whereby there's just nothing that I could point to where you would say no, government involvement is a bad idea. For some reason, for you, that's a topic that is absolutely mandatorily, just government should be involved with that, and I don't know why. And I think it's a faulty logic to put yourself in a situation where I have this belief and no amount of evidence can push me out of this belief. What that is evidence to me of is almost a religion and indoctrination. Something where no amount of data can push me in the other direction.
I mean, I would say the same thing, but the opposite. I would say that, looking empirically around the world, countries that have spent more on education have seen more success in their educational systems. And you would refuse to switch your opinion. I think we just fundamentally disagree on what the role of government is here.
No, we do disagree on the role of government, but that's the philosophical argument. On the utilitarian stuff, let me give you an example. If you ask me back that question, what evidence would you need to see from my utilitarian perspective to say, you know what, government does an outstanding job at that. They did that. And let me give you an example. And actually, that's not necessarily a good example. If you ask that question back to me, I would say, okay, here's what I would need to see. I would need to see a consistent pattern in many different countries whereby when government put more energy, more effort, more resources, put more money into education, government, the number of private schools, and I mean proper private schools without any government funding, went down. In all these environments, and these controlled experiments accounting for all these variables, when I saw a consistent pattern that government, over many decades, the quality of education went down, I would know, quality of education went up in the socialized system, then I would know then I was just wrong. And government should be involved. They have a net benefit to the education system. That is a standard that you can provide for me. And then I'll be like, I have to say I was wrong because the evidence is to the contrary. But I've asked you that question and you haven't been able to give me that standard that I can hit.
Because I think that from empirically speaking, the education system has been maybe not spectacular, but better than it would be had the government not been there in the first place. And once again, I mean, honestly, I can't look up statistics right now in Sweden, Norway, South Korea, etc. But those countries very heavily invest in their education and rank amongst the top in the world. And the countries that spend the least rank amongst the bottom. So, I mean, that's pretty big evidence right there.
Again, yeah, no, I agree. I'm not going to fight you on those statistics. I don't want statistics where we'll both send each other blind looking up percentages. But what I'm saying is, so this is very important. It's very important not to compare. It's really the same thing with the gun control. They'll say, well, in that country, the gun rate is this, and in that country, the murder rate is that. And so for a given population and for a given set of citizens, when you make the transfer, well, what happens? Do things improve? Do things go down? And so there's no point comparing some African nation with a totally different set of beliefs and violence and a million different variables compared to a Scandinavian country. What we need to look at is within those countries, and we can do the same for America. Within America, as government's reach in education has increased, what has happened? And we can look at Scandinavia and look at the same things. And so for Scandinavian education, do you have the historical data, or are you just comparing Scandinavia to Botswana?
I mean, we can do both. And honestly, I don't have the data right now to look at what Scandinavia's literacy rate was 100 years ago versus now. And as you said, we're not going to get into statistics for it. But I mean, it'd be something interesting to look up, because from what I have seen, from my angle, is that public education has done good. And you have not seen that, obviously. But it would take, there would be a point where I would say that government intervention doesn't work. But I don't know what that point is, to be quite honest. And I really don't see feasibly where a purely private school system would do better. And even if it did, I don't know if maybe the net benefit would be higher in terms of the amount of education provided on average per student, but maybe it's only the top 30% of students getting an education, and 70% aren't. Even in that case, even though the net benefit might be better, I would not agree with that sort of system, because I believe that everyone should be entitled to an education, whether it's the most efficient method or not.
So that's a really, really important point. Efficiency is a secondary concern for you. What's the correct? Is fairness is the higher priority?
I mean, if it's that, when it comes to specific things such as, I'm not saying everyone should have, a TV, right? I'm not saying something like that. But when it comes to very specific things like healthcare and education, and just basic standard of living and being able to live in a house, not a house, but being able to not live on the streets. Yes, I would say fairness is better than efficiency, especially when there is more than enough efficiency to go around. Okay.
Here, this comes up often with socialism on lots of different issues, so I'm glad we found our way to this. If you knew, well, hang on, do you agree with this premise that the free market is more efficient?
Oh, yeah, I mean,
but it's just not fair. It's less fair.
Yes, sure, I would agree with that. I mean, I've taken economics courses. That's pretty much what it says.
So the free market can get a better value for dollar in the world of education, but it can't do it fairly, is the argument.
I think that's the pretty general. I think everyone. I don't think that there are anyone that really believes that it won't necessarily.
No, I would, especially over time. You can snap your fingers and say, okay, we're going from free market to a socialized, everyone gets the same everything. And the following year, yes, everyone gets the same everything with a reasonably close approximation. As time goes on, I would argue that the efficiency, how am I going to explain this efficiently? The efficiency of the free markets over many, many decades, that constant rapid fire innovative process, the creative destruction of the free market, new entrepreneurs coming in, old entrepreneurs going out, constantly doing things better. That process and that efficiency over time, what that means is that over many decades, even the person who is the worst off in the free market in several decades is even better off than all the people who are fairly allocated in the socialized system after many decades. Now, maybe you want to expand that to centuries or millennia, I don't know. But do you agree with that over time?
I do not. I would not agree with that in terms of the specific education or healthcare and stuff. I think that overall the standard of living does go up under a capitalist system. I'm not advocating against that, and as I said, neither I and I don't think Bernie's a socialist. But if you look at this specifically, I think that if we gave public education to the free market and we came back 200 years later, I don't think the poorest in the society 200 years from now are going to be any more literate and probably more illiterate than the poorest in society right now. That's of my belief.
Okay, but you do agree that the mean 200 years from now would be higher than the mean on a socialist system?
I think it's possible. I don't necessarily disagree, but once again, it's one of those arguments of fairness and ethics. And, I'm not looking at everything like numbers. And, And if we live in a true libertarian system where there are no social nets or anything like that, and people are dying on the streets, sure, the richest in 200 years are going to be richer than the richest now, but we're also going to have, widespread hunger and, lots of people dying on the streets because they don't have access to healthcare and this and that, which I don't believe is right.
Okay, so it sounds like the fundamental premise here on this little thread of the conversation is that without government, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I try to establish a goal for myself to hit in a conversation so that I know that when I get there and the person doesn't change their mind, well, now I know that they're not operating on logic, they're operating on belief systems and I would say religiosity. So there's a number of videos on my website if anyone wants to check it out. It's the false belief that without free markets, then the rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and I don't find that to be true at all. Before I answer the question, is there any evidence that I could give you that would make you think that belief system that you have, that without government to redistribute wealth, then the wealth gap will increase? Is there any evidence I could give you that would make you think that that's incorrect?
Yeah, I mean, if you brought me not just one, but lots of instances of society where there was little to no government intervention, the quality of living was high, and there was little income inequality, then yes, I would agree. But from what I have seen so far, the societies that have the highest standards of living and the lowest income disparities are the ones with the higher government intervention.
Okay.
So I have a lot.
I don't think I can quite meet that standard right now unless we go and troll through statistics, which isn't fun for anybody. But I think I can anecdotally give you some information which you would well be aware of. I don't think you're going to disagree with any of it, which will prove, at least provide evidence, a piece of data, that belief that wealthy people can control and manipulate and distort and hurt poor people to the point where they get poorer. And that piece of information is, if you look at, and it's a statistically significant piece of information involving over 1 billion people. If you look at the last 2-3 decades of where this very, very wealthy country, America, 3-4 decades ago, you had one of the poorest countries in the world, China, very, very low standard of living for the average person in China, very, very high standard of living for the average person in America, huge wealth disparity. And all of a sudden, these free trade agreements take place. There's lots of question marks around what all that means and how free it was. But in a nutshell, anybody in America can buy anything from China. Anyone in China can buy anything here. We can employ each other. We can do whatever. Most importantly, the saving grace for China was that there was no minimum wage, I would argue. And so what happened was, over several decades, we've seen a tremendous flow of wealth from the rich country to the poor country. Like, just staggering. Within China, hundreds of millions of people in the last few decades have lifted up out of poverty because so much wealth has flowed from America to China. And then you look within China, and they have moved away from totalitarian governments towards freedom. They're nowhere near free in any stretch of the imagination, but over the last several decades, they've moved away from there towards freedom. And within that, we've seen a narrowing of the wealth gap. It's still tremendously huge because they're still tremendously communist, but it's narrowed. Within the United States, over several decades, government programs, welfare, social security, food stamps, the number of government programs designed to narrow the wealth gap has exploded. And yet the wealth gap is increasing. So between the free trade agreements, which said that wealth flowed from rich to poor, between domestically what happened in the United States where we moved towards socialism and we've got worse results, and the third experiment is in China, where we've had a movement away from socialism and towards freedom, and we've seen an increase in the middle class. There's 3 examples involving over 1.3 billion people, and the same is true for India and lots of other places, where free markets, more freedom and a movement towards total freedom, as in the free trade agreements, did not result in the rich oppressing the poor.
I mean, I would disagree, because if we're looking at, we can look at China, for example, and you talk, first of all, you're already moving to macroeconomic stuff, not just policies that government is inflicting upon its own people, but sort of free trade. And so as a result, China has benefited off of the US. It's not like their own. It was very much reliant on us, and so that's the first thing I would say. It's not their own. It's not necessarily microeconomics. At that point, you're already speaking large scale. And then the other thing about China is that if you looked at the last 40 years, and sure, their standard of living has gone up, but I mean, not by a lot. You know, their average wages are still 40 cents to per hour, if not less. And I looked at up a few years ago. I don't know how much different it is now. And so, yes, there has been a benefit, but the rich are still substantially more richer than the poor. And the poor have not benefited from this free trade nearly as much as the rich have, really incrementally so. And it's really only as a benefit of the U.S. Now, to your U.S. example, one of the big things is that taxes have gone down substantially in the last 40 years. If you're looking 40 years ago in the 70s, the highest marginal tax rate was 90%. So the fact that the rich people are the richest of the rich are paying so much less, I think is one of the big reasons for the income disparity. Now, also, I think another reason of the income disparity is the sort of way that, once again, we haven't gone back and fixed the problems of our poor, specifically in terms of the education systems in the inner cities. And once, yes, the government has not been good in terms of education in inner cities. We can come back to this, but as a progressive, I would go back and continually try to change the system instead of just pulling out completely. So those would be my responses. That yes, the increased use of food stamps, increased use of welfare hasn't decreased income inequality, but I would say it's also largely due to the fact that we haven't targeted the problems that we have, and the fact that taxes have gone down so much for the rich. So that's how I would respond.
Okay. There was a brief period there where taxes were up really high at 90%, but it was the minority of the time for the vast majority of the last 2 decades. America is relatively quite highly taxed at present. So especially with the reduction of loopholes, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And by the way, I mean, I'm for abolishing all taxes, but I would absolutely start at the bottom and work my way up. I agree with that aspect. We're coming to the top of the hour, mate, so I want to wrap it up. I want to say thank you very much for joining us. Is there any final thoughts you want to have? Take a minute to have a final thought for everybody?
Sure. I mean, as I said before, I think that third-party vote is more or less a protest vote, and I can respect that. But I feel like if you look at the candidates that are going to be going up forward, since I am representing Bernie, I guess, in this next election, if he does get the nomination, just looking really hard at hopefully making a vote for Bernie, and the fact that in a lot of his stances, they do really line up with the libertarian beliefs. And in a few, education, healthcare, and wherever else you stand on the other public industries like roads, sure, he doesn't align with you. But I think on the net, he might align with you a little more than you think. And I think a lot of people of many political leanings don't necessarily take the time to understand where the others are coming from. And I'm really thankful that I got to come today to experience a little bit of that. So my only plea is to maybe look a little bit at the other side and see where they're coming from as well.
Awesome. Eli, thank you very much. I appreciated the conversation. I'll see you soon.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Take care, man.